Hello and welcome to Bold Women Lawyers Spotlight Interview. I'm Sharon Christie, founder and CEO of Bold Women Lawyers, where I provide business coaching for women lawyers in solo and small law firms. Today, we are going to be talking all about content writing. It's a huge issue for all small businesses, but particularly for lawyers. And I have a terrific guest, Gina Femison, Gina Femison, who is not only a content writer, she is a lawyer. So Gina, welcome. I'm really happy to have you here today.
I'm excited to be here.
Oh, good. All right. So we're going to talk all about content writing. But before we do that, I want to have you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your background and how you got to become a content writer. So tell us about that.
Sure. I've been to law school since I am a lawyer. Prior to that, I actually have what I like to think is a sort of unique background. But my undergraduate degree was in community health and political science because, I'm a lawyer. And
Get it? I get it.
Yeah. I worked in IT for several years as well. And then I went to law school. So after law school, I always like to try to combine those three pieces of my background somehow. So I actually went into compliance work. So I worked for compliance for a university. And then I actually went into healthcare compliance, working for a pharmacy benefit manager as well. So it actually allowed me to kind of take various pieces of my background and use them both in the university setting, working with Title IX and with the healthcare pharmacy benefit manager. But after some time, what I realized is that my favorite part of actually all the work that I did was the writing piece. So I love to do research, I love to write, and there's so many other pieces that go into compliance. And, I realized that, I could focus more on the pieces that I like. So during the pandemic, I actually stepped away from my previous position, and what really cemented moving into content writing for me, I actually did a year of homeschool preschool with my son.
Wow.
Which
a brave woman. You're a brave woman. Yes.
It was a lot of fun though. And it surprised me too, because I'm like, whoa, this is like, like, how am I going to teach my son? And it's preschool, so a lot less pressure, but for me, at least, not the actual teachers that know what they're doing. But it was a lot of fun. I spend a lot of time doing creative work, which is not what I had the chance to do during compliance. So I was painting and drawing and researching different ways to teach, letters and concepts and sounds and numbers with my son. So it was really a time for me to realize that I love that creative piece, and that's what's been missing from my career previously. So I looked into ways, obviously with my son, I need lots of flexibility. So it was really important for me to find whatever I did in my next part of my career was something that allowed me to have time with my family, allowed me to explore that creative space. But then I also get to do the parts of the job that I really love, which are the researching and the writing. Mm-hmm. So that's the long story of how I ended up.
That's a great story. I love that story because, what you said was that you have this great background as a lawyer, but you realize that what you loved and where I'm sure you really shine is the creative side. And for a lot of lawyers, I can tell you for myself, when I was in practice, like, don't ask me about being creative. That's not me. You need somebody else if you want to be creative. I'm a lawyer because there's not a lot of creativity in it, and that fits, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And it's funny because I still like that piece of the legal field, which is why I'm a legal content writer.
Yes.
Yes. But at least there's more creativity in the content writing than other types.
Well, and that really leads to my next question, because as lawyers, we all feel like we can write, and we can, and we were all taught how to do legal writing. And so lots of lawyers think, well, what's the big deal? To write a blog, to write an article for, say, social media, not a law review type article, but what's the big deal? I can write. So what's the difference between legal writing and content writing as a lawyer or for a lawyer?
So it's funny. After I actually started a blog in between when I was working with my son as well. And I was in a writing group, and I was actually expressing to them, I'm like, I have to remember how to use adjectives again, because as a legal writer, I like doing work in the legal field. Like I stopped using adjectives, and I stopped like writing in a descriptive manner, which it was hard to kind of work my way back. So it was actually a great start to actually go back into blog writing and realize, okay, what I'm writing sounds very formal, very straightforward. I need to make this interesting. And I think that part of the difference is that there's different audiences. So with content writing, you're talking to your potential clients. With law firms, you're talking to people who may or may not, but most likely may not have a legal background or may not have the same skills that you have in that specific field. So you're coming from a place of knowledge, trying to explain it to someone else. And I think this is where my IT background really helps, because I actually served on the front line of IT, and I was like the service desk for a few years.
Wow.
And I was
Okay.
working with people who I would answer the phone, and people were like, I want to throw my computer out the window. And it was kind of talking them through that. So like I understood the IT and the technical knowledge, but then I had to explain it in a way that someone who was very ready to throw their computer out the window could understand what they need to do. And I think it's similar in content writing. So it's taking a very complex idea or a complex legal concept and then trying to explain it in a way that's both interesting, but also still conveys the actual content. And I think that's what helps me the most, being a lawyer, is that I understand the concept. So there's a step that I get to skip over when I start doing content writing, versus someone that may not have that legal background. So it's like I understand the concepts. I have the background. I've obviously taken a wide range of courses in law school, so like nothing is too far off. Like everything feels sort of familiar to me as I'm going into the various concepts.
Exactly. And yeah, I mean, you make a good point. If I'm writing a motion or a brief or an appellate brief, something for a judge, the way I write that would be very, very different than like when I was in practice. My practice was disability law. The way I would write, or I would get help writing a blog post or an article that was going to be for consumers who might someday need disability benefits. Totally different audiences. And so totally different writings, even though I may be writing about the very same thing, but totally different in the way it's expressed. And I love what you said, like you had to relearn how to use adjectives, but it's true, because we know, judges like get to the point, get to the point, get to the point, give me the citations, give me the law. Whereas a non-legal person thinks, what in the world does all of this mean? How does it apply to my life, right?
Exactly. And I think what really makes a difference for me, and what I always have to consider when I'm writing, is that the audience is coming with feelings, with content writing. Like they're coming from a real life standpoint with something that's really affecting them. Which is very different from, a neutral party that's looking at it saying, I just want, literally the facts and just the information.
That's right.
So
that's right.
It's addressing, the emotion that is caught up in, why you're actually seeking legal help.
Yeah, exactly. So when you are preparing content, let's say I came to you and I was, my practice is disability, and I say, Gina, I don't know where to start. I know I need content. I know I need to, everybody's telling me I need content. I need to put it out. I don't even know where to start. How would you help me with that? Where would I start?
So I think it would depend on where you are currently.
Mm,
So if
good
you
point.
have a website, does your website have a blog? Do you have testimonials? Do you have case studies? Do you have pages for all the various uh, types of law that you practice?
Hmm.
So, I mean, it may be starting with, the practice pages and actually writing the content for there if they don't exist already, or if you're going into a new type of law, adding that practice page might be the first concern, so that whenever potential clients land on your website, obviously they know that you can actually help them with that problem.
Hmm.
But then
Hmm.
going forward, if you already have all of those set up, then obviously we might want to look towards blogging or other ways of like newsletters or other ways of keeping in contact with former clients or potential clients, um, to just sort of stay in front of them, because people can't remember you if they don't see you. So there's
Amen.
visibility.
Amen to that. Hmm.
And then
Hmm.
also, remembering that you're building authority. So every time that you publish a blog post, or even when you publish practice pages, you're saying, I have the experience. This is an example of my knowledge, my skills. This is why I can help you. So it's considering those factors. So it would vary. So
Hmm.
I my process starts with a discovery call, and I would talk to the person, the attorney, and understand where they are, what their goals are in their business, and then we could work through from there what would be the next steps.
Okay. Let's talk about newsletter for a minute because I know, I mean, I utilized that when I was in practice, and I actually had a hard copy newsletter that was mailed, believe it or not. But it was because my clients, at least at the time, they progressed as time went on, but were not really tech savvy. A lot of them didn't use email very often, and so an e-newsletter would be lost on them because they weren't going to read it. So I had a hard copy, and I think there's great advantages to a hard copy, but it's much more expensive, obviously, to
Mhm.
produce than an e-newsletter. But let's just talk about newsletters in general, because I talk to a lot of lawyers and clients who say, wow, I just have to write about all these legal things in my newsletter. And I don't think that's the case. But tell me your view on, what should a newsletter contain? How do you go about putting it together?
Okay. Part of it will depend on the frequency. So
Hmm.
if
Hmm.
it's going to be like a weekly or a monthly newsletter,
Hmm.
we'd want to decide on the actual length of it. If you're sending weekly, it doesn't need to necessarily be as long. Or maybe you want just sort of a short, hey, I'm still here, sort of reminder to people as well. So the length would matter, and then also there's ways to bring in news stories and other things that are happening that are current events, and to try to talk about them from the attorneys, from their perspective, and how they
Hmm.
would relate to the clients, obviously, because everything is going back to the potential clients or the clients. So I think there's ways to make it interesting, but also relevant, but still building expertise as well, and
Hmm.
that showing that attorney is able to help when that situation arises for that potential client or client.
Sure. Yeah, I think that, the key, I think is what you just said. Make it interesting, because if it's not,
Yeah,
nobody will read it, right? Nobody will
yeah,
read it, and it goes right to the delete. Um,
yes.
you hit the delete button and it's gone, and so all your work is for nothing. What about social media? I mean, you've
Mhm,
talked about blog posts,
mhm.
and is the content that you'd use, say, for a blog on a website, would you use the same content, say, in your social media? How do you look at that?
Well, the interesting part, and this is something I'm also still learning a lot more about as well, and building up my own social media. Well, working on it, building up my own social media, because it is a process. So I totally recognize that it's a process and there are many steps. But a lot of the information can be repurposed, and that's what's
Yeah.
so about writing a blog post. You can take quotes out of there, or you can take pieces or an idea from it and you can repurpose it, whether it's in a LinkedIn post, an Instagram post. You can turn it into a reel. You can turn it into a TikTok if you want to, if you wanted to.
And you know, there's plenty of
And it's
lawyers out there that find it effective.
Yeah. So I think writing the blog post is really useful because it's a way that you can create one item and then repurpose it across so many different ways. So you can also promote it in your newsletter. You can promote the blog post, regularly through all of your feeds. So it's a great way to create one piece of content and then try to make the rest of your work easier from there.
Yeah, that's a great point, because it can feel completely overwhelming to people when they think, I've got to have this content on my website and a blog and social media and LinkedIn and Facebook and this and that and the other thing. And yet, as you say, you can take one piece of writing and then you repurpose it for different venues, basically, where you're going to post it. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I think the benefit also with a blog is, again, that you own the website. So again, you own that content. So even if something happens to any one of the social media organizations, companies, you still own that content. So you can still use it in any way you want to going forward. So I've actually been reading more about how people repurpose content over time. So, you may build that blog post now, and in 6 months, you're like, hey, don't forget, I've actually talked about this before, or maybe a news, something happens in the news and you can be like, hey, I've already discussed this, and you can bring it up and repurpose it in that way as well. So there's a lot of ways to keep, to get a lot of use out of the content.
Yes. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about, your background. You are a lawyer. You were in practice for a number of years in different fields, right? So let's talk about the difference between you as a content writer and someone else who's a very good writer but has no legal background.
So what I feel like is that it gives me a little bit of a leg up. Only because I'm familiar with the concepts. I'm familiar with doing legal research. I know which sites I'm going to trust for content in terms of the research. I know when I'm looking for statutes. I've actually, even in my compliance work, I've done a lot of work looking at statutes in various states. So it's like a commonplace for me to be like, okay, I need to go to this state statutes and I have a rough idea of where they are. And this is what I'm looking for in their statutes because I've already navigated that information. And it's something that helps me dig a little in a different way, deeper into, I think, the research, but also into makes it a little bit easier to write. So it's taking my background, my knowledge, but using that in the content. I'm not sure if I was clear there, but
yeah, no, I think that is clear, at least clear to me, because if you're a lawyer and you're going to write a blog about family law, and there's been a change in the law, and you're going to write about that, it's really helpful that you can go and read the law and understand what it's saying. And then, as you had said to me before, when we talked before we started today, that you translate legalese into easy to understand bits of information. And that's really important. But it just seems to me that as a lawyer writing it, you're going to have a lot more confidence that you actually do understand the law, and you can then translate it into understandable information for the general public, as opposed to somebody who's not a lawyer who's trying to understand what's the law to begin with and then translate it. So I think you're right. I think you do have a big leg up for that very reason. Yeah.
And I think it helps me understand, I mean, obviously there's marketing rules and other pieces that go into with lawyers. And that's something that I'm familiar with, obviously, from the ethics rules. So that that helps. I think, having someone that's like, can work around those pieces as we're working on content.
No, and that, again, that's a really important point, because the advertising, the writings that lawyers put out to the general public are governed by the ethical rules. And although I don't think we're under as much constraint as my friends who are financial advisors, because they have to get
Mhm.
unbelievable amount of approvals before they can do anything. Lawyers have to abide by those ethical rules, and you have to understand them and know them before you start posting information. So again, I think that's a very important point because we do have that extra burden, if you will, that we have to meet before you can start placing all of your content wherever you're going to put it. You also told me that, and I'm just looking at my notes here, I want to make sure I got it right. You employ on-page SEO best practices to help potential clients find your clients. So tell me what that means.
And specifically with the on-page SEO, so we're talking about headers, and these are all the things. Well, let me back up. These are the things that search engines, specifically Google, Bing has a little bit of the the market, but really we mean Google most of the time. But these are the things that when Google is ranking content, these are the pieces that they're looking for when they're trying to decide if specific content actually meets what the person is searching for. So there's things that you can do when you're writing blog posts or practice pages that help when Google is ranking the website or ranking the actual page for search. So there's headers, the way that you use headers. They're using keywords as well throughout. That's actually why I know location-specific content also helps with lawyers because people search by where they live. So they might be looking for a lawyer that's close by or in their town or in their state specifically. So those are some of the pieces that I keep in mind as I'm looking at, as I'm writing the content. There are many other pieces of SEO that are more in terms of how the website is set up, but I focus on what's in the actual, the content.
Right, exactly. Okay. Now, are there any legal fields that you don't write content for, or can you work with lawyers in any field?
So I have written across several different fields at this point. So I've bounced between criminal law and personal injury and immigration as well. So as I was mentioning, having that background in law and being able to do the research, nothing feels completely unfamiliar to me. Even though I didn't study immigration law, just reading about all of that, it's all familiar to me to some extent because I've either read about it just for my own reasons, I've encountered it in work. So it's really I am able to do that across all of the different fields. But I have specifically chosen to work with lawyers, coaches for attorneys are also another field that I look into because I think reaching out, being as someone who's changed their position in the legal field, that's a area that I personally, connect with. But also, I also work with legal recruiting firms too. So, but yeah, I have written, like I've mentioned, I've written across several different areas. With my Title IX background, like writing about sexual harassment and Title VII. Those are sort of the other areas that I also get into. So
okay. All right, great. Well, listen, Gina, this has been fascinating. Now I am putting up this is your email, right?
Yeah.
Gina.femison@gmail.com if somebody wants to get in touch with you and find out more about your services. And I understand you offer different packages depending on what someone needs. Okay. So they can just send you an email and you'll take it from
and I'm
there?
also on LinkedIn, so you can connect with me on LinkedIn and find me there as well.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Well, Gina, thank you so much for coming on today. I really do appreciate it. I know I've learned from you. I've learned a lot from you. I know that our listeners have also. So just remember, if you need some help with your content writing, or you just have questions and you want to talk to Gina about that, just shoot her an email or connect with her on LinkedIn, and she'll be happy to help you. So thanks, Gina, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you very much.
All right. Bye-bye.